know what white nationalism means whenever it's used by liberals or the mainstream media that tends to be more center, and I will not say left, but anytime there is a use of the phrase white nationalism, it has to be used in America in the most severe example possible in order for it to even be tagged with this term or to be used or characterized as such, because we are not a nation that pushes any further left than liberalism. So you have to understand that if we are calling somebody a white nationalism, they have unequivocally displayed in some manner their white nationalism. It is undeniable. You know how the media is. CNN, MSNBC, both sides, not trying to be too inflammatory with their use of language, attempting to control the masses with their manufacturing consent that never fully addresses the severity of right-wing ideology in this country. They are constantly doing a service to those who are expressing these beliefs or carrying out these acts of right-wing terrorism because they don't want to be too hysterical. So, keeping that in mind, you know that anytime we are using this phrase white nationalism or white supremacy, it is an undeniable, unequivocal display. It took literal Nazis walking down the streets in Virginia, chanting, "Jews will not fucking replace us," in order for them to be pinned by the mainstream media as neo-Nazis. And even then, Tucker Carlson would probably pull this bullshit in defense of those who marched on the streets of Charlottesville, the Unite the Right rally, and be like, well, wait a minute. Are we really sure? Let's define what, and just find some sort of workaround. But so quick to call into question what it means for our US military to be a little bit more diverse or inclusive for pregnant women, as if this is a real issue, that this was taking away the masculinity of our US military, comparing it to that of China because they have a developing navy, and what that means if we are going to be equipped to be able to go up against a possible threat launched by the Chinese Navy, having a bunch of women, pregnant women, muddying the waters. Like, so misogynistic, but not in a way that Tucker Carlson can be like, yeah, I fucking hate the idea of women in the US military because I think that they are going to drive down our performance. I don't think women are as good as men when it comes to combat, and I don't like this idea that if we had to go to bat and fight China in a war, then we'll lose because Joe Biden is trying to be more inclusive for women. Just women, not trans women, not trans men, not non-binary people, but just women in the military. So quick to fully understand what it could mean now that pregnant women are serving in the military, and they even have complimentary suits that accommodate their bodies whenever they are with child. He knows exactly what this could mean, but he doesn't necessarily know what it means whenever people walk down the streets with tiki torches, chanting, "Jews will not replace us." He doesn't necessarily mean whenever a bunch of Trump supporters storm the Capitol building in an insurrection. He doesn't know if that's really, let's think about what this means. This is really an insurrection. Like, he defends all of these actions whenever they are portrayed or illustrated or carried out by those having similar ideology or similar political views. And the problem is that he has such a large platform and he influences so many people. That is dangerous.
Fine. white supremacy. What is white supremacy?
Can somebody tell us in very clear language what a white supremacist is?
Okay, first, very clear language seems like a high bar to clear for a man who spends 85% of his time making the befuddled face of a 13th century farmer learning about Bitcoin. And I promise that we're actually going to give Tucker a pretty clear definition of white supremacy later in this piece, and he does seem to need one, because whenever he tries to define it himself, it tends to be self-servingly narrow.
Do women actually want to pick up a rifle and enter a combat zone? There are obviously women who serve in the military, so that answer is yes. Just a question. Oh, just a question. The fact that women voluntarily sign up for the military indicates that yes, some women do want to pick up a rifle and go to war. Just like the men. Just an answer for your question.
This show was not on the air for 6 months before there was an organized and highly aggressive campaign by prominent Democrats to denounce us as white supremacists. The first time it happened, the people who work on this show, many of them kids, were shocked and horrified by that. White supremacists?
I think they should be allowed to, but their standards shouldn't be lowered. Why do you think their standards would be lowered? What makes you think that their standards are lowered? As far as I know, as far as I understand, the standards are not lowered for women who are in the military. Why do you think they are? Why do you think that standards are lowered for women in the military? Is the boss of Proud Boys, Enrique Tarrio, and his black girlfriend also white supremacists? Yeah. They are lowered, what do you mean? How so? No. More women can join? Okay, so teach me something. Let this be a teachable moment. Please describe to me the different standards placed on men versus women in the military. C3, I have first-hand knowledge to this stuff. Their standards aren't lowered, at least not anymore. I'm all for having women in the military, but there is a huge increase in rape having male and females together. Are you suggesting that women maybe should not be joining the military because men can't stop raping them? Yeah, sounds like maybe we should be taking rape in the military incredibly seriously and making sure that men or anyone who is guilty of sexual assault or rape is held accountable for their actions, and that there is due process, and that any woman who comes forward or any person who comes forward with rape allegations is given the opportunity to go through the traumatizing steps, to be taken seriously, given a rape kit, tested, all of those things. Men raping both men and women. Have nots. Yet every branch requirements besides special forces are altered for women.
There told him, everyone else is still at lunch, can you do it? which might be the single whitest origin story I have ever heard.
So let me just answer this question. MU Hazard, of course, I believe that women, trans women, cis women should have the opportunity to compete in women's sports. Just, there you go.
Heard. Hey, you with the skin and face. We've got an extra career lying around. Are you interested? But despite his total lack of preparation, Tucker was almost immediately hitting on themes that he'd be echoing for the next 25 years. Because here is one of his very first TV appearances in the aftermath of the OJ verdict.
Let me ask you, Mr. Carlson, do you think we're honest with each other race to race?
Oh, no, of course not. I mean, everybody is terrified of one thing. Whites are, of course, terrified of being called a racist. Blacks are terrified of being belittled. Of course, I think we need actually probably less conversation about race. I think it might do us good were we to ignore the subject a little bit and treat each other as if there were no color boundary separating us. I think that might be helpful. I think we talk about it in some ways too much.
Okay, first, I'm pretty sure that black people are less terrified of being
It goes back to what we were talking about earlier, where you have educational curriculum in our elementary school system that is whitewashing and misrepresenting the severity, the reality of slavery, that makes it incredibly difficult for kids to grasp or contextualize the concept in its entirety, understand the institution in its entirety. And then they grow up and then they hear people like Tucker Carlson say we shouldn't be talking about race. Maybe we should not be driving a race-based war, because I don't believe that there is such a thing, is pretty much what Tucker Carlson is saying, or that I don't want to have to be bothered to talk about the way in which African Americans are still impacted by the ramifications and the remnants of slavery. It doesn't impact me. I don't want to have to address it. I want to be blind to it. I want to be blissfully ignorant of it in its entirety. And people say, hey, maybe this Tucker Carlson guy, he's onto something. Maybe it's best to just pretend like, or maybe it's in the interest of everyone if we don't make everything about race. I mean, I don't know what it means to be impacted by race. I'm a white person, but I don't want to be bothered to hear other stories who are impacted by race. It's maybe not my problem. And maybe that's the way that we try to just move forward. And that seems like a really good deal for a white person who has never experienced racism in any form, but then doesn't want to be bothered to understand what it could possibly mean to be on the other side of this equation, to be the person who is experiencing racism, not during slavery, not during Jim Crow, not during the Civil Rights era, but right now. If your greatest fear is being accused of being a racist, you're almost assuredly are. It just goes back to how white privilege manifests in this country, where and conservative and bad faith conservative arguments, where they are so audacious in their positions that they are willing to stand at the forefront of their white supremacist talking points and their rhetoric. Maybe they are aware of what they're doing. Or they're not. I don't know. I would say they are. And they're just trying to normalize. Or divert attention away from any liberation that could ultimately pose a threat to you if you are acutely aware of how you benefit from a white supremacist society, right? I'm going to go so far to say that that's probably what it comes down to, more than you're just genuinely ignorant and a stupid person and do not understand your own privilege. Right? Which is even more nefarious.
Belittled than have been killed, jailed, economically exploited, or indeed
What is white supremacy? What's the definition of white nationalism? What's the definition of white supremacy? Well, I don't have my fucking Webster's dictionary out in front of me, but I'm going to go so far to say that if you're looking to have a descriptor, it would be a person who says something along the lines of, immigrants make our country dirtier, less clean, or whatever the fuck else he said.
Times it happens all the time. The enforcers scream racist on Twitter until everybody gets intimidated. It's a tactic, a well-worn one. Nobody thinks it's real, and it won't work with this show. We're not intimidated. We plan to try to say what's true until the last day. And the truth is, unregulated mass immigration has badly hurt this country's natural landscape.
How really?
fuck off, Tucker, you relentless.
You're right. Tucker Carlson is so motherfucking right. Listen. Immigration has 100% hurt our natural landscape. Think about what was going on for the indigenous people who in many respects had their own land treaties, had their own constitutions, had their own codified systems in place, their social fabric was intact, and then all of a sudden, settler colonialism, unwanted immigrants came in and completely tore up the beauty of this natural landscape, the pristine forests of green that used to be here before Western civilization came and fucked that all up, and then we started to fuck up the entire country. I mean, Tucker Carlson's kind of right to a certain degree. It's not Hispanics who are destroying the built environment of this country, or the natural environment of this country, rather. Then chiseled their faces on the side of their mountains. Yeah, adding insult to injury. Just came in, took all of the land, raped, pillaged, murdered, genocided the entire group of people who were here before them, and then built a whole bunch of fucking parks and suburbs. And caused a whole bunch of problems for the people who now live here. Hashtag free Britney.
Indignant picket fence. How did you go from criticising Pat Buchanan for that precise tactic to basically imitating him? It's all, to borrow a phrase, a bit much. But that technique gets to the absolute heart of Tucker's show. So often, he positions himself as someone just asking the hard questions, the ones that they don't want you asking. Questions like, is affirmative action racist? And should America be selective with immigrants? And has the Democratic Party become anti-white and anti-male? Just asking questions while heavily implying that the answer to those questions is yes. But when in turn anyone questions him, they are not just censoring free speech, they are launching an attack on the foundations of our democracy and the vast working class who this humble TV dinner princeling somehow represents. And the most telling thing about Tucker's framing of himself as the scourge of the elites and the hero of the common man is that for Tucker, who constitutes the common man is very selective. Take Ilhan Omar. Just watch him lose his shit over a clip that he's about to play of something she said.
If anyone should love America, it's Ilhan Omar. This country rescued
She does
her
love
from a
America.
squalid Kenyan refugee camp and made her a national figure, quite an ascent.
All right, nobody talks about Ilhan Omar. Ilhan Omar has repeatedly said, I love this country That's why I criticize it. That's why I push back on its broken promises, because it's supposed to give me the opportunity to live freely as somebody who has entered this country, who is trying to make a difference, who is trying to ensure that America makes good on their promises and their values to give everyone the opportunity to have a decent life, to have liberties and justice for motherfucking all. And that is precisely what Ilhan Omar tends to say over and over and over again. And her criticism of the United States of America is always preceded with her saying, I love this country, and this is why I stand up and I question what this country has become and how it's shied away or deviated from its values that's written on paper, as if that's really believable anyway. But she does believe in what the Constitution stands for, and she does stand proudly in her criticism, because she is trying to do better for people not just like her, but everyone who would serve to do better if the US government and the Constitution held up to its own standards. Hold on one second. Did he just say that she came from a Kenyan refugee? Well, she's from Somalia.
America, it's Ilhan Omar. This country rescued her from a squalid Kenyan refugee camp and made her a national figure, quite an ascent. But Ilhan Omar is not grateful. She hates us for it. Watch Omar tell us it is time to dismantle our country.
As long as our economy and political systems prioritize profit, without considering who is profiting, who is being shut out, we will perpetuate this inequality.
Where did Ilhan Omar say, I fucking hate this country? Again, this is just Ilhan Omar criticizing the United States and how it is deviated from its promise on paper that it will afford everybody the opportunity for a decent life in the American dream. Whatever that even means. It's not real, but... calling out the injustices that this capitalist system has thwarted onto everyone is not saying I hate America. It's just not. People over profits. Yeah, she literally said people over profits. That is not her even condemning this country or the Constitution or the government. It's condemning capitalism and how capitalism, obviously because it's put on a pedestal by the US government, has put so much undue burden on so many people where they can't even live a decent life. They can't even provide for themselves or their families. They can't even experience any semblances of economic comforts, while those at the top are just drowning in billions of dollars. It's fucking class warfare. Yes. You implied capitalism might be a little bit bad. Why do you hate America? Exactly. Well, conservatives defend capitalism vehemently, right? Because it's almost like they understand that capitalism is rooted in our political systems. It's almost as if they understand that capitalism serves to benefit a certain group of people. Not people who look like Ilhan Omar, obviously. People who look like Tucker Carlson. And so obviously they're going to do something like a 2-for-1 where they are going to vilify Ilhan Omar because she is a member of a minority group, and then another minority group, and then another minority group. She's a brown Muslim woman refugee. She poses a threat to everything that Tucker Carlson defends. So of course he is going to go above and beyond to make sure that he can make her look as bad as possible. It doesn't matter if he is outright spewing disinformation about her, twisting her words. He is doing that on purpose. We know that at that point. We know this at that point. It's time to start over. Danny, thank you for subscribing tier 1. The problem is that conservatives do not know anything about any culture or any heritage outside the United States. American culture is just materialism and vast consumption of fast motherfucking food, and that's it. That's the extent. They have no interest to do a fact check. They will take Tucker Carlson at his word, and they don't care what he has said and whether or not it is an outright lie. And it is. To suggest that somehow, to suggest that somehow it is justifiable to completely go overseas, dismantle the Middle East because they are not human? Trying to objectify these people as those who have been completely uprooted, dismantled, killed, all in the name of the Iraq and Afghanistan war? Yeah, it's on par with conservatism and the conservative message. And the reason why he can say that is because whenever you say something you want to hear, and you typically don't or might not feel so compelled or feel so inclined to do your own research. And it doesn't matter that what Tucker Carlson has said is completely what he has said is inhumane and Islamophobic and bigoted and just outright despicably evil. It's what people want to fucking hear, unfortunately. And that is the sad reality as well. Amy Cardinal, Timothy Dolan, you responded to a question about... Okay, never mind. You know what? This sounds incredibly familiar. This is what justification was made during the time of colonization in this country, where indigenous peoples were viewed as savages who needed to be saved, who needed to be saved by Western civilization, indoctrination of Western values, and those who had taken the land of indigenous people took it upon themselves to try to encroach upon the lives of the remaining indigenous people, to try to force them into the Western world, right? Western imperialism is very much, and the defense of Western imperialism is very much in line with the settler colonialism tactics that we saw in this country with the indigenous people, and where they literally objectified and dehumanized these individuals in order to defend their actions, their violence. American culture, cheeseburgers, beer, big tits, ability to drive fast in a circle.
First used in the Middle East and Byzantine Empire, and was still conspicuously absent in Europe until centuries.
I can't believe John Oliver. I mean, I guess it's good. Just be like, this is how fucking wrong Tucker Carlson is. But it's like, of course they like, in case anybody had any fucking shred of a doubt. Yeah, the forks actually go back to the Byzantine Empire. think about running for office?
The niece of a Byzantine emperor brought a case of forks to Venice for her wedding feast in the 11th century, she was roundly condemned by the local clergy for her decadence, with one saying, "God in his wisdom has provided man with natural forks, his fingers, therefore it is an insult to him to substitute artificial metal forks for them when eating," which is absolutely fascinating because it's not just a full refutation of Tucker's lazy racism, it's also a very fun fork fact. Fork fact! Fork facts are fun! The point is, when you know how Tucker speaks when he speaks freely, the filter through which he processes the world for his audience becomes painfully apparent because he is smart enough not to openly say into a camera that certain races are more deserving of scorn or less worthy of respect. He will just heavily imply that depending on who he's talking about. Take the Capitol riots. Tucker said that he deplored the violence, but repeatedly compelled his viewers to try and understand where the demonstrators were coming from.
On January 6th, we had a riot at the U.S. Capitol. Why did that happen? It happened because millions of American voters were convinced that the last election was not fair. Where did they get that idea? Well, it wasn't simply because the last president told them so. You're hearing that now as if they're animals.
Not only did Donald Trump absolutely tell his cult of personality that the election was rigged, he got out in front of it in anticipation that he was going to lose the election to Joe Biden by saying or throwing out cautionary tales that there were higher rates, or it was most likely the case that in-person voting would lead to higher rates of voter fraud, and that we should be wary of the validity of vote by mail and ballots cast by mail because, and this is the lie that Donald Trump launched in anticipation that he was going to fucking lose, that they cannot be trusted obviously this was an attempt to have something in place to be able to catch him when he falls, to not shatter his incredibly fragile ego. This was an attempt to soften the inevitable blow, or the potential blow, to his ego in the event that he, in fact, lost the presidential election. So it's worse. It's not that Donald Trump said that in response to the 2020 presidential election that this was rigged. He got out in front of this early on in anticipation that this was going to be the results. Which means that Donald Trump does not care about American democracy. He does not care about the sanctity of our electoral system or our democratic processes. He just wanted to make sure that he did what he could to win, either through a free and fair election, or the other route that he tried to take, convincing however many elected officials to recount the ballots, however many lawsuits to try to call into question whether or not we can trust Dominion voting systems, whether or not some ballots casts were verifiable, whether or not state legislatures had made decisions on how to vote or provisions on how to vote that were in fact unconstitutional, which the Supreme Court ruled that they weren't. Of course, Donald Trump told his voting bloc that the election was rigged. Of course he did. He had been saying that months in advance. That cast doubt on our systems in place altogether. to turn around and suggest that people aren't stupid. The reason why they are taking issue with whether or not we can trust the outcome of our 2020 election is because they did their own research, right? And QAnon conspiracy moms love to say that they did their own research. They came to this conclusion all by themselves. Nobody had to tell them anything. Nobody had to guide them. They didn't have to fall down the QAnon rabbit hole. They didn't have to spend 20 hours reading conspiracy theories on Facebook to ultimately do their own research to follow up on what they had read and decide that, yes, this is in fact what they believe to be correct. The Trump clan was conditioned into accepting the possibility that the election might have been stolen or rigged because we cannot 100% trust the results of vote by mail or the ballots cast by mail. And that was a seed planted by Trump before the primary, or was it? It was not before the primary election. I think that it came around, close to the primary election. But shortly thereafter, that was a seed planted by Donald Trump himself that made people question the results, the outcome, the validity of this election. So this is just being intellectually dishonest. This is specifically ignoring and undervaluing, discounting what Donald Trump had been doing up until the presidential election. Okay, dead horse, he's dead.
Animals who take commands and do what they're told, but they're not animals. They're people, they're American citizens who can see what's happening and come to their own conclusions about it. They saw the radical increase in mail-in voting, millions did, and it corroded their faith and the public's faith in our systems.
Yeah, because Donald Trump told them that they should not trust vote by mail. The results of elections that by and large include mail-in voting because they were fraudulent without having any evidence to back up this claim whatsoever. It's just so incredibly dishonest. It's despicable.
Of election.
Okay, hold on. People didn't think the election was rigged because they saw an increase in mail-in voting. They thought that because people like you repeatedly told them the election was rigged. And that plea for understanding there is especially hard to take when you contrast it with how he reacted to last summer's Black Lives Matter protests.
People like this don't bother to work. They don't volunteer or pay taxes to help other people. They live for themselves. They do exactly what they feel like doing. They say exactly what they feel like saying.
I've never seen conservative projection like this, ever. The Black Lives Matter movement adopts heavily from the Black Panther Party in their values, in their belief system of communal living, of collective action. They believe in the values of standing up in solidarity, to fight back against systems of oppression, to support and promote Black liberation. They are not, by any stretch, looking at this through the scope of individualism or acting as individuals. They are part of a collective. They have shared value systems. They are working to achieve their collective goals that they have to literally fight for. If they didn't have to fight for Black liberation, if they didn't have to fight for their own power or political agency or equality, they wouldn't be marching on the fucking streets in 2020. It's just, it is the antithesis of what the Black Lives Matter movement truly is. What you have just described is rugged individualism, touted by assholes like you, promoting and supporting the ideals of conservatism. But again, Tucker Carlson is not trying to be honest about the goals or the shared visions or the principles of the Black Lives Matter movement. He's trying to demonize and vilify the movement in its entirety.
Spray paint their opinions on buildings. On television, hour by hour, we watch these people, criminal mobs, destroy what the rest of us have built.
Criminal mobs. How does Tucker Carlson feel about the insurrection? Criminal mobs, you think? Anybody? I don't think so. No, he
They have
doesn't.
no right to do that. They don't contribute to the common good. They never have. Yet suddenly they seem to have all the power.
Well, that's quite a different tone. And it is interesting to see who gets to be American citizens who came to their own
All right, he
conclusions,
already said that.
and who gets to be criminal mobs who destroy what the rest of us have built. And it does seem like the dividing line for Tucker on that question is, how easily
Hey, Jay.
can you sunburn? And look, my point here isn't that Tucker is inconsistent in addressing two violent protests in vastly different
He does
ways.
not.
It's that he's
Tucker Carlson.
actually incredible.
Tucker Carlson does not believe the insurrection was perpetrated by Antifa. Tucker Carlson is going to say that the insurrection was perpetrated by Antifa to throw everyone off the scent, because that is what he is paid to do. He is paid to try to whitewash. He is paid to try to whitewash and de-escalate the incrimination of white people and what they are guilty of in upholding white supremacy, white nationalism. He is there to try to divert the conversation away from the true crimes committed by those on the right, by those as part of the Republican Party, and find any way possible to otherize anybody who stands in opposition to the values of the conservative Republican Party, which just happens to be white nationalism and white supremacy, and racism, and bigotry in general.
Consistent, because in both instances, his clear takeaway is that white people should be terrified at the idea of any situation where they aren't in power.
Right.
The main narrative of Tucker's show is
Right.
that power is being taken away from you, his viewer, and that this needs to be resisted. He's run segments just asking questions, remember, like how exactly is diversity our strength, and has argued not just that it isn't, but that it's a threat to our existence as a cohesive country. In fact, he'll often call to resist that threat with an interesting choice of phrase.
Western civilization is our birthright. It makes all good things possible. Undefended, it collapses. And so we've got to fight to preserve it. It's a war with one side trying to erase all remnants of its opponent, in this case, Western civilization. Is the culture into which they're coming, the Western civilization we're talking about, superior to the culture that these immigrants are bringing?
Do you think it's possible to move a large Muslim population into the West and successfully integrate them into Western culture? Have you seen that anywhere?
Yeah, for Tucker, it seems Western civilization is somehow both the mighty and essential bedrock upon which all modern human existence is built, and also a delicate house of cards that will collapse if you so much as look at it wrong. And again, he will be careful not to verbally link race and civilization like he's calling into a Love Sponges radio show in 2006, but he will occasionally dance incredibly close to it.
Let me just stipulate, I'm for getting along, I'm for colorblindness, I'm for tolerance, 100%. But I also think that if things radically change in your country, it's okay for you to say, what is this? And maybe I don't want to live in a country that looks nothing like the country I grew up in. Is that bigoted?
Yeah, dude.
Yeah.
So, the thing that Tucker Carlson says, but it's not plainly stated outright, he is in favor of Western civilization, and the culture that he believes is the most favorable or needs to be preserved is white, homogenous society, where white people have a cohesive social structure in place in which white people dominate, in which systems are built to benefit white people. He's not saying that, but that's what the fuck he means. And so anybody who poses a threat, any immigrants, any racial or ethnic minorities that could attempt to corrode the structural dominance that a white Western homogenous society has in this country could pose a threat to anyone who directly benefits from it. And so that is what he is saying without actually saying it. Thank you, Black Knight, for the host. That's what he means. And so this is actually the antithesis of what he is just saying. He's not for tolerance. This is not being tolerable toward those who have opposing religious beliefs, who have different ethnic backgrounds. You are not saying that you are allowing for room in a diverse country. You are saying, is this bad? Will diversity threaten the white, homogenous society that the forefathers built for people like me? And that is what he is trying to, that's the seed that he is trying to plant in his viewers. That, listen, you have to be able to read between the lines here, Tucker Carlson viewers. Do you see what I'm doing? I am telling you to not be outwardly racist because that's going to be frowned upon. That is going to make it difficult to continue on with our mission to uphold these systems of oppression in place that you benefit from. If you want to make sure that we're doing this right, be a little methodical here. Don't be outwardly racist. Say that you are in favor of colorblindness or not making everything about race. Say that you are in favor of X, Y, and Z, that you will then say doesn't pose or is not something that I want to make a big deal out of or want to discuss at length, that this is something that you will be willing to acknowledge to a certain degree by saying, insofar that I am colorblind, meaning that I do not want to acknowledge anything about race other than acknowledging that I don't want to talk about race, and that somehow will belittle any opposing thoughts that will ultimately be your getaway car, so that you don't have to seem as though you are guilty of knowing how much you benefit from this system. It is absolving you from any acknowledgement if you just say, I don't think that any racism exists, and I'm not racist, and I'm tolerant of anybody who doesn't look like me, but then follow up with all of the shit that we have just discussed that completely contradicts those original statements, the premise of your argument, which is bullshit from the jump. It is bigotry, that is the whole thing, but it's bigotry in a methodical way so that you are not being outwardly bigoted, you're not being outwardly racist. You're using these taglines and you're using this soft language to be able to make it appear as though at the surface that you're not who you say you are. Well, the cat's out of the fucking bag because nobody is falling for this bullshit who isn't stuck up your ass and believes that you are the fucking, you know, the king of fucking Fox News or whatever. But the problem is that too many people do look to Tucker Carlson. I keep on saying Tucker Carlson. Do look to Tucker Carlson for their news, for their beliefs, for their perspectives. So many people rely heavily on what Tucker Carlson has to say. This is why he's so dangerous.
Yeah, it is. That's like saying, I've got 10 fingers and toes.
I hate that they get to call themselves activists. It makes me fucking sick. I know that activist is just a noun. But it just bastardized. I don't know why I'm just pointing out how words are bastardized and then they bother me, sorry, but it's just, God. Just imagine this being what you fucking are an activist for. He doesn't deserve the word activist. Exactly. But, you know, if it's what you believe in, that's just what you are.
Conference room full of fellow white supremacists.
An example of someone engaging in very effective rhetoric is, of course, Tucker Carlson. Tucker is helping mainstream conservatives change the way they think about politics and causing a massive swath of Trump voters to look deeper into many of the issues that we already talk about. The left is aware of what he's doing, and he's aware of what he's doing, so it works phenomenally.
Oh, that might be the single worst laugh I have ever heard, and I say that as someone who has almost forgotten what human laughter sounds like. I've been stuck inside Casper's arsehole for 12 long months now. I'm so desperate to hear the response of a live audience, but if it is a neo-Nazi chuckle ping-ponging off the walls of a hotel ballroom, I think I might be out. And look, if everything I've shown you tonight somehow still isn't enough, let's hear from a literal former grand wizard of white supremacists, David Duke. He's not only tweeted approvingly about Tucker in the past, saying Tucker is right and can't cuck the tuck, which, as all Tucker viewers know, refers to when a humiliated man watches his wife have an affair. Duke, even where he sometimes just recaps Tucker's segments from the night before. Humiliated man watches his wife have... And look, if everything I've shown you tonight somehow still isn't enough, let's hear from a literal former grand wizard of white supremacists, David Duke.
You know, white people do have the fucking audacity to think like this is what, this face is what makes you fucking superior? That this is what you need to fucking preserve? Why is David Duke not dead yet? Good question. I don't fucking know.
He's not only tweeted approvingly about Tucker in the past, saying Tucker is right and
Yeah.
can't cuck the tuck, which, as all Tucker viewers know, refers to when a humiliated man watches his wife have an affair. Duke even has a podcast where he sometimes just recaps Tucker's segments from the night before. Last year, when endorsing Trump for president, Duke even suggested that Tucker Carlson should be his VP, explaining Tucker's value to the white supremacist cause like this.
Can anyone here think of a handsome white man who is also vehemently racist? No, because if you're vehemently racist, you're not handsome. You're not handsome. Doesn't matter what physical characteristics you have, that under other circumstances you might be regarded as handsome. If you are a vehemently racist person, you know what I'm about to say. You know what I'm about to say. He looks like John Bolton with that. He does, kind of, yeah. You're either racist or attractive. I'm saying that if you are attractive under conventional standards, if you are considered conventionally attractive, but you're a fucking racist, all that attractiveness just goes away. It's amazing how, yes, once you realize certain components of a person's personality, and if those components include you being a fucking racist, I no longer find you attractive. It's just how it works. Thank you, Brett. You know what I'm talking about.
To hear that white supremacist families gather around to watch Tucker twice? The fact is, millions of viewers a night watch him once, and once is already more than enough.
That's pretty good. That's really good.